It was the most magical time of my life. At 28, I thought I'd met the love of my life in Mike, someone who could fill the empty spaces in my heart. Our relationship had grown so quickly, and just as fast as it began, we found ourselves married within a year. Mike had this infectious laugh that could light up any room he walked into, and I, the planner, found my feet grounded in the digital marketing world. It seemed like the perfect match, until the cracks began to show. The morning after our wedding, I woke up to a living room piled high with gifts and envelopes, remnants of a celebration that still felt like a dream. It was beautiful in its chaos, the kind of mess that made you smile even though it was overwhelming. Just as we started opening the presents, Mike's parents, Carol and Dave, dropped by. I hadn't really had the chance to know them yet. Our marriage had been so quick, but they seemed nice enough, nothing too out of the ordinary. But as we began to sift through the gifts, something felt off. Carol's gaze fell on the crystal vase my Aunt Linda had given us. "Is that a crystal vase?" she asked, her voice practically dripping with interest. Before I could respond, she had placed it aside, separating it from the rest. "I think this would look lovely at our house," she said, completely nonchalant. Mike was distracted, untangling kitchen gadgets from his cousin, but I shot him a look, hoping he'd step in. He didn't. "Mom, that's our wedding gift," Mike said, his tone light, as if it was a joke. But it wasn't funny. "Oh, come on. It'll just collect dust here," Dave chimed in, wrapping his arm around Carol. "You two are young. You'll get plenty of gifts over the years." I tried to laugh, but it didn't sit right with me. This was the start of something bigger, something I wasn't ready for. For our first anniversary, I wanted it to be something truly special. A celebration of us. I booked a table at Chez Louis, a cozy little restaurant we both adored. To make it even more memorable, I invited Mike's parents, hoping it would show them how much they meant to us. When we arrived, Carol and Dave were already there, menus in hand. "This place is fancy," Carol remarked, her eyes scanning the chandeliers above. Mike squeezed my hand under the table, a silent thank you for organizing everything. As the waiter came by, I ordered salmon, Mike's favorite. Carol's eyes, however, immediately darted to the priciest items on the menu. "We'll have the lobster and the filet mignon," she declared, almost without hesitation. Dave followed suit. "And why not throw in a bottle of your best wine?" he added, winking at the waiter. I tried to keep my voice light. "Quite the celebration, huh?" But inside, something was eating at me. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. It was our anniversary, and yet, it felt like the night was being hijacked by their overindulgence. When the check arrived, I watched Mike's face falter before he quickly recovered and handed over his card. "I've got it," he said. But as Carol linked her arm through mine on the way out, I could feel the weight of the evening. "This was lovely," she said, her smile wide. "We should do this again next year." I nodded, but inside, I felt like something in me was quietly breaking. With Thanksgiving around the corner, Mike and I began to decorate our home for the holiday season. The living room filled with warm fall colors, and the smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air. It was cozy, exactly the kind of space you want to come home to after a long day. But as we hung lights around the windows one evening, Mike's phone pinged with a message. He read it aloud, chuckling. "Oh, my parents are ahead of the game. They've already sent their Christmas wish list," he said. My heart sank a little. Was I really ready to be swept up in this whirlwind of expectations? Mike's phone buzzed again, and he laughed. "Yeah, they send one every year. Helps with shopping," he explained, scrolling through the screen. But curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't help myself. "So, what's on this famous list?" Mike hesitated, then handed me the phone. As I scrolled through, my eyes widened. The list was extensive. Top-tier electronics, designer clothes, luxury items they probably didn't even need. I couldn't believe what I was reading. "They can't be serious," I muttered under my breath. "This is a lot." Mike took his phone back, shrugging nonchalantly. "They like the good stuff. What can I say?" I didn't know how to respond. The list wasn't just about gifts, it felt like a silent demand. A list that set a standard for what was expected, and frankly, it felt like it wasn't about us anymore. Even as Mike remained unfazed, a knot was forming in the pit of my stomach. Mike's birthday was also coming up, and I'd been so excited to surprise him with the watch he'd been eyeing for months. Now, it felt like no gift could match the extravagant expectations that had been set for us. Maybe we should just ask for charitable donations in our name, I suggested half-heartedly, trying to lighten the mood. Mike laughed. Good one. But seriously, what do you want? You need a new laptop, right? His attempt to make things easier felt empty. The pressure of this growing disparity was taking its toll on me. The holidays rolled around quickly, and I found myself standing in the kitchen, wrapping a gift for Carol and Dave. A nice coffee maker, nothing too fancy, but practical. It felt right for them, something they could use without it being too personal. When they gave me their gift, it was a set of scented candles. They were lovely, but the difference was stark. The disparity in thoughtfulness was hard to ignore, and though I didn't say anything, my frustration simmered under the surface. Mike, on the other hand, seemed pleased with the fancy drone they got him. He didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he didn't mind, the way their gifts had set the tone. It was clear that the unspoken rule was, we were expected to give big and receive small. And I hated it. The more I wrapped gifts and pasted on a smile for the holidays, the more I found myself counting the costs, not just in dollars, but in the emotional toll this was taking on me. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my desk, an email notification popped up. It was my quarterly bonus. To my surprise, it was larger than I had expected. Immediately, I knew what I wanted to do with it. Something meaningful. Something for Mike and me. We had talked about going to Paris ever since we met, and now felt like the perfect time to make that dream a reality. That night, over dinner, I told Mike about the surprise. His face lit up in a way I'd never seen before. Paris, really? That's amazing, he exclaimed, getting up to kiss me. But just as we were basking in the joy of the moment, his phone rang. I could tell by the shift in his demeanor that it was his mom. Yeah, she booked us a trip to Paris, Mike said into the phone, and my heart sank. I should have asked him not to say anything yet. As he spoke with Carol, I saw his enthusiasm slowly dwindle, and a painful look settled on his face. They want to come with us, he said finally, almost as if he were asking for permission. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. To Paris with us? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike nodded, his hand running through his hair. Yeah, they said they've never been, and always wanted to go. I think we should take them. The room suddenly felt too small, suffocating with the weight of his words. This trip is for us, Mike, I said, feeling the tightness in my chest. It's supposed to be for us. We can plan a trip with them another time. Mike's face was torn. I know, but they're getting older and I feel bad. They've done so much for me. My mind was flooded with all the one-sided gift exchanges, the anniversary dinner, and every little thing that had piled up over the past year. This is our time, I said, my voice firm. This bonus, it's for us. Mike's response was a frustrated sigh. They won't understand. You know how they are. I tried to keep my composure. I know how hard I've worked for this, and I want us to enjoy it together. Just us, like we planned. But Mike's silence spoke volumes. Finally, he relented. Okay, we'll tell them some other time. But when the time came to tell them, Mike faltered. Maybe we can all go together next year, he offered weakly, but Carol was having none of it. Why next year? We can afford it now, she snapped, her voice laced with disappointment. And that was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Because this trip is for us, Mike. For us. We need this time together, I said, frustration finally bubbling over. There was a long pause before Carol's voice came through the speaker, dripping with disdain. Well, that's very selfish of you, Jane. Very selfish indeed. After the call ended, the tension between Mike and me was palpable. He was torn, and I could feel it. But this was one thing I wasn't willing to budge on. Paris wasn't just a destination, it was a symbol of what we had, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from us. Mike began to retreat into himself, becoming a shadow in his own home. He left early for work, returned late, and our conversations became monosyllabic. Dinner's in the oven, I'd say, my voice echoing in the empty house. Thanks, he'd reply, the word hollow, hanging in the air between us. I missed him. I missed us. I longed for the easy days when we dreamed together, when we laughed together. But those days felt further and further away. I longed to reach out to him, to break through the invisible barrier that had erected itself after the argument over Paris. But every attempt felt like speaking through a thick glass wall. I could see him, but I couldn't reach him. One particularly hard evening, I sat across from Mike at the dinner table. The sound of his fork scraping against the plate drilled into the silence, making every second feel unbearable. I cleared my throat, my voice barely above a whisper, fearful of shattering the fragile peace we had settled into. Mike, this can't go on, I started, my words hesitant but necessary. We need to talk about what happened. We can't let this silence, be the new normal for us. Mike continued eating, his face a mask of unreadable indifference. Then, as if my words had finally pierced through, he set his fork down. That simple gesture told me I had his attention, if only for a moment. What do you want me to say, Jane? He asked, the weariness in his voice unmistakable. I took a deep breath. I want to understand why you're taking this so hard. Why it feels like you're choosing them over me. His eyes flickered, but he didn't answer immediately. He folded his hands in front of him, his knuckles white from the tension. They're my parents, Jane, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. They've been hoping to go to Paris their whole lives. What about what we've been hoping for? I shot back, frustration bubbling up. What about our plans? Our dreams? Mike ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation that had become all too familiar. I know, he murmured, but I saw something in his eyes, conflicted, torn, but not indifferent. It's just they've always been there for me. I feel obligated, you know? I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. But where does that leave us, Mike? What about our marriage? There was a long pause, and in that silence, fear crept in. Fear that maybe we weren't as solid as I had believed. That perhaps the foundation we had built was less rock and more sand, easily eroded by the steady tide of his parents' wants and needs. It's supposed to be us against the world, Mike, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside me. Not me against you and them. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in days I saw the flicker of the man I married. He was still there, still struggling, but I could tell he hadn't given up completely. I know, Jane, he whispered. I just don't know how to make everyone happy. I nodded slowly, feeling a sudden clarity wash over me. That's just it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. We can't always make everyone happy. But we made vows to each other, Mike. Doesn't that count for something? Mike's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of hope. It does, he nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the table before meeting mine. It counts for a lot. The rest of the meal passed in a contemplative silence, a stark contrast to the strained quiet that had become our norm. It was as if my words had planted a seed, or perhaps watered one that had been dormant within Mike all this time. But as much as I wanted to believe things were changing, I couldn't shake the fear that something deeper was brewing beneath the surface. The morning sun poured in through the windows, but the warmth it usually brought seemed to have no place in our home today. I woke up to an eerie quiet. The other side of the bed was untouched, and for a moment, I simply lay there, staring at the empty space beside me. The silence in the house felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its stillness. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I reached for my phone, expecting the usual absence of messages. The silent treatment had taken residence in our home, and I had grown accustomed to it. But this morning was different. Instead of the usual emptiness, my screen was flooded with notifications, all from my bank. A lump formed in my throat as I scrolled through the details. Multiple transactions, airline tickets, hotel bookings in Paris, all made while I was asleep. The timestamps told me the flight had already left hours ago. Mike and his parents were already on their way to Paris, using my hard-earned bonus to fund a trip I was meant to be on. Disbelief turned to anger, and then to a crushing sense of betrayal. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, as the reality of what had just happened settled in. Mike had accessed my account. I trusted him implicitly, never imagining he would abuse that trust. Yet here it was, in stark black and white, a digital paper trail of deceit. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The one person I had believed would stand by me had chosen his own comfort over our relationship. And as I sat there, the weight of everything unsaid, everything left unresolved, crushed me. I had ignored the small signs, made excuses for him, for us, but now, the truth was staring me in the face. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number. I knew he wouldn't answer, not with the time difference, not with my previous ultimatum still ringing in his ears. "Mike," I began, the beep of the voicemail almost mocking in its cheerfulness. "I saw the charges. You took your parents to Paris with my bonus. I don't even know what to say, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth everything." The walls of the house seemed to close in around me as I hung up, the silence now a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. They had left, just like that. No regard for me, or for the life we were supposed to be building together. I stood there for a moment, still holding the phone in my hand, and then I made the decision. I canceled the hotel rooms, the return flights, every piece of the trip that was connected to my bonus. I would no longer allow them to take what was mine. With each cancellation, I felt a piece of my old life fall away. The future I had envisioned, gone in an instant, evaporating before my eyes. By the time I was done, there was nothing left to do but act. I contacted the bank, removing Mike's access to my accounts. Each click felt like a finality, terrifying, yet liberating. The man I had married, the family I had tried to be a part of, they were all just strangers now. Strangers who had used me, who had seen my generosity as something to exploit rather than cherish. I packed my bags with robotic efficiency. Each item was a reminder of a dream I had to put away. There was no going back from this. No gentle words, no apologies that could mend the rift that his betrayal had caused. Mike had chosen his path, and in doing so, he had set me on mine. The ring I had once worn with pride lay cold and heavy in my palm. I set it down on the counter, its sparkle mocking in the morning light. With one last look at the life I was leaving behind, I closed the door on the house that was never truly a home. It was late afternoon when I finally left. My car was packed with clothes and essentials, a stark reminder of the sudden turn my life had taken. As I drove, the messages began to flood in. One from Mike, several from his mother. I pulled over to read them, knowing they'd only fuel the fire of my resolve. Mike's message read, "Jane, please, we need to talk about this. Can't we just discuss it?" His words seemed almost insulting in their simplicity. I started to type a response, then stopped. No words would bridge the chasm between us. His mother's messages were a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on? Why have you canceled our rooms? Call me." I imagined her sitting in a cafe in Paris, expecting luxury, only to find complication. I turned the phone off. They were in the middle of a trip funded by deceit. They could figure it out. My first stop was the bank. I needed to ensure my finances were completely secure. The bank manager, a middle-aged woman with a gentle face, greeted me. "I need to make sure all my accounts are locked down. My husband, he won't have access anymore," I explained, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil inside me. "Of course," she nodded, offering a sympathetic smile. "Let me make sure you're protected." By the time I left the bank, my accounts were secure. A new sense of determination settled within me. I drove to my sister's house, the only place I felt I could go. She opened the door before I could even knock. "Jane, I've been so worried," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. I allowed myself a moment to just be held, to let the reality of my situation be shared. "I can't believe he would do this to you," Sarah said as we sat down at her kitchen table. "You deserve so much better." I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. "I do. and that's why I'm not going back. I've canceled everything. I've left the house. I'm done. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Good for you. What's your plan now? I looked around the familiar room, feeling the first twinge of relief. I'm not sure yet, but I'm starting with a divorce. I can't stay married to someone who has so little respect for me. Sarah's face was a mixture of anger and pride. I'll support you however I can. Do you need a lawyer? I'll find one. I nodded. I need someone who doesn't know Mike or his family. I need this cut clean. The conversation shifted as Sarah helped me unpack my car and make plans for the next few days. There was a strange comfort in the mundane tasks, a grounding in the midst of chaos. I was standing in the kitchen at my sister's house, a mug of coffee warming my hands, when my phone vibrated with a persistence that felt all too familiar. It was Mike again. Jane, we need to talk.
I'm sorry.
I miss you, and I think we can work things out. His text read, a mixture of apology and plea. I sighed, the same rehearsed I'm sorry becoming a threadbare blanket that no longer provided comfort or warmth. Not this time, Mike, I muttered under my breath, typing a response that left no room for ambiguity. There's nothing left to discuss. Please respect my decision. I could almost hear the desperation in the silence that followed, but it wasn't enough to make me reconsider. Not anymore. My resolve was tested further when, a few days later, Mike's parents made a dramatic appearance at my sister's doorstep. Their faces were twisted in anger as they barged past Sarah, who stood wide-eyed at the door. You've got some nerve, Jane, his mother exclaimed, her voice shrill. You ruined our family vacation. You're just a greedy, selfish woman. Sarah stepped between us, her stance protective. That's enough. You're not going to come into my house and insult my sister. The argument escalated, and I was sure the neighbors were peeking out of their windows, probably wondering if they should call the police. It ended with Sarah threatening to do just that if they didn't leave. Their departure left a sour air that lingered long after they were gone, but amidst the chaos, a realization settled within me. I was truly done. The divorce process was a cold, legal ballet, and I danced my part, signing papers, nodding through explanations of settlements and divisions. But with each stroke of the pen, I felt a chain breaking, a tether loosening. And then it was over. I stood outside the courthouse, a free woman. The air was crisp, a gentle wind playing with the loose strands of my hair. Sarah hugged me tight, her support unwavering. You did it, Jane, she whispered, pride evident in her voice. I had done it. I had stood up to the selfishness that tried to claim me. I had stood firm against the manipulation that sought to keep me bound. I turned away from the courthouse, away from a past that no longer held me. The messages from Mike continued for a while, a mix of apologies, bargaining, and eventually anger. But they went unread, floating in the digital void as I moved forward with my life. The apartment I rented was small but bathed in sunlight. I filled it with plants, books, and new memories. I went back to school, enrolling in classes that fueled a passion for learning that I'd neglected. And one quiet evening, as I sat on my little balcony with a cup of tea in hand, I deleted Mike's number from my phone. I was free. Free to heal, free to grow, and most importantly, free to be unapologetically me. Please feel free to comment below if you like this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.